Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
It is 404 day in the 404. That is Atlanta's, or North Georgia's actually original area code. I grew up actually outside Augusta, Georgia, and 404 was our telephone prefix as well. And then it became mostly Atlanta. And now Atlanta has, I don't know, seems like half a dozen phone prefixes. Anyway, happy 404 day to those who celebrate. It is also Sine Die here in Georgia. That is the final day of the Georgia legislative session, the General Assembly, doing all they can for one last day. And I have to tell you something, man. I am just geeky enough that I did stay up last night to watch the Georgia Senate when I heard that at the 11th hour, the Republican Party, Georgia GOP, was pushing through their hijacked bill, House Bill 127, which originally was supposed to just add some personal leave days for teachers to be able to use, and then got hijacked. Well, literally hijacked, I would say, to have anti-DEI measures thrown into the bill. In fact, I'm going to let you listen a little bit to some of the sausage getting made, if you will. You will hear Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones asking for a reading of the bill, and then you're going to hear some back and forth. Again, Max Burns from, was it Sylvania, Georgia? Yeah, Sylvania, Georgia. Old enough that I know for a fact he went to a segregated school system, K through 12, I'm guessing, and never saw a person of color in his school hallways at any point in his lifetime, yet he is the authority on DEI, again leaning on sports analogies, which I will attack as well. First things first, let's get to the Lieutenant Governor asking for a reading of the bill.
Secretary, read the caption.
House Bill 127 by Representative Cox, the 28th and others, bills to be entitled an act to amend Part 4, Article 17 of Chapter 2 of Title 20, those GA related to sick, personal, and maternity leave for teachers and other school personnel, so as to increase from 3 to 5 the number of accumulated sick leave days teachers or other school personnel may take to each school year for personal or professional reasons, derived for related matters, repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
That was the original bill, and then there were amendments.
Stand by, Senator. We got to finish reading the caption. Stand by. Secretary, read the caption.
House Bill 127 by Representative Cox, the 28th and others, the bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 4, Article 17 of Chapter 2 of Title 20, those GA related to sick, personal, and maternity leave for teachers and other school personnel, so as to increase from 3 to 5 the number of accumulated sick leave days for teachers and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Hickman, Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Education and Youth offers the following substitute to House Bill 127, bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 1 of Title 20, those to GA related to general provisions relative to education, so as to provide that local education agencies and post-secondary institutions shall not promote, support, or maintain any programs or activities that advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, strive for exceptions, strive for sanctions, strive for definitions, strive for related matters, strive for effective date and applicability to repeal conflicting laws and for other purposes. Mr. President, the minority report to House Bill 127 has been attached, and that completes the order.
So, all right. You heard the DEI stuff thrown in there. Again, Senator Max Burns from Sylvania, 23rd Senate District. He's a big fan of sports analogies. And so when he took to the floor to open debate, that's exactly where he went again.
Let's talk about equality. Equality means equal opportunity. As you study DEI literature, often there's a reference to ensuring that everyone can see over a wall. Tall people can easily see over the wall. Modest-sized people have a harder time. Shorter folks, unfortunately, can't see over the wall. And so DEI, I recognize that might be a bit of an offense to the senator from the 6th. Shouldn't be. Because you've overcome the height disadvantage. And you've overcome the height advantage not by being provided a special treatment, but by being provided skills and tools to overcome a height disadvantage. The senator from the 31st and the senator from the 6th make that the 8th. Was it the 6th? It's the 6th. Had an opportunity this week to visit my alma mater and the senator from the 31st alma mater. We went to a football practice, Mr. President, at Georgia Tech. They were trying to figure out how to play football like the Bulldogs do.
Go Dogs.
But I noticed that on that team, there were large, massive linemen. And there were short, fast running backs. At the end of the day, they all were given an opportunity to play. And they all achieved that opportunity through hard work and perseverance. So I would suggest to you that equality is what we seek. Equity would say results are standardized. That's not the objective of this policy or the policy in Georgia. So I'm happy to take questions, happy to yield the well.
So let me first read to you from the Association for Talent Development. This is back in 2023, really pretty much before the anti-DEI push became a political haven for the right. And they too like sports analogies. In fact, they dive into how DEI made its way through sports long before anything else. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, they write. It's what companies and schools and society everywhere are talking about, defining and incorporating into their mission. DEI experts are in high demand, and education around the subject seems to be on everyone's agenda. I would argue it's been on the GOP's agenda to eviscerate. Anyway, it makes sense, they write. This is the Association for Talent Development. This is their job. This is what they do. What is surprising, however, is how little anyone has looked for examples from the DEI OG, the old guard. Sports. Indeed, while sports haven't always been perfect, they have generally been ahead of their time, they write. Sports teams incorporated diversity, equity, and inclusion before DEI was a common societal term. Great example here. Bernie Kosar, legendary NFL quarterback and Super Bowl champion. Was he a champion? Wasn't with the Browns. Anyway, he started his career with the University of Miami Hurricanes. His 1983 squad, emblematic of the time and place, brought together players from various racial, economic, and ethnic backgrounds. In his words, quote, "We forged a brotherhood that overcame all the obstacles, and in the process, we became a symbol for the whole troubled city of Miami of what could be accomplished by a group of guys who put aside their differences and scrambled back from their collective adversities," explains Kosar. In one of his Open Sesame Plus courses, The Beauty of a Diverse Team, he tells firsthand how he and his teammates shared clear and simple objectives and understood their roles and responsibilities, which helped them build complete trust. Major League Baseball, they write, most recently evidenced by the highly successful World Baseball Classic, has players representing at least 20 countries, and that has been the case for years. The teams in the clubhouse and on the field are diverse. They were DEI before DEI. In one of his Open Sesame Plus courses, Uniting a Diversity Team, Justin Sua, a mental performance coach for both the NFL and the MLB, discusses his fascination with how leaders unite teams with diverse backgrounds, teams separated by decades in age, different languages, and wildly dissimilar upbringings. He shares the story of a player who took it upon himself to learn a new language and bring the locker room together through empathy, listening, understanding, and relationship building. Anybody seen Ted Lasso, by the way? And sometimes I need subtitles watching Ted Lasso. I know it's English, but man, some of those Scottish fellas, what? And while some sports, I'm going to continue from the Association for Talent Development here. And while some sports were clearly ahead of their DEI time, others may have lagged behind. Cullen Jones, four-time Olympic medalist and part of the legendary world record-setting 4x100 freestyle relay led by Michael Phelps, which made Jones the first African-American swimmer to hold a world record, talks about a time when he was the only black swimmer on his competitive team. His feeling of isolation actually caused his performance to decline, he says, until his coach got involved. In one of his Open Sesame Plus courses, Inclusion Sparks Performance, Jones explains how his coach's awareness and simple efforts at team and family socialization propelled him to number one in the world. When I started to feel comfortable, that's when I started excelling. Max Burns liked sports analogies, but I bet he didn't like those. Okay, so Senator David Lucas stepped into the fray last night in the debate, and this is only the start of what Georgia Democrats tried to do to derail this bill.
Recognize Senator from the 26th.
26. My good friend.
I used to be your friend.
You still
Do
on?
you? With the Senator, yeah. Do you hear something?
Absolutely.
Tense.
Do you believe what you just read?
I do.
Do you really?
I appreciate the question, Senator, but I believe that equality is our goal. And that to discriminate against a student and not allow them to be admitted to a university because of their ethnicity. The courts have ruled in 2023 that
Still can't say that.
Harvard and other schools utilized ethnic bias and denied access to more qualified students. I would not want that to happen in Georgia.
Well, it actually doesn't happen in Georgia already, but that's beside the point in this push for anti-DEI measures. This is all about placating the audience, the folks in their bleachers.
With the gentleman yield.
Certainly.
Lucas goes in further here.
Isn't it true the plane crash over the Potomac was blamed by the president on DEI?
Yep.
DEI, that's the same thing you were talking about. It was blamed on DEI. Isn't that what the president said?
Mm-hmm.
I believe there were news reports to that effect, and I believe the issue was whether or not the operators of that aircraft were promoted based upon their sex, not on their ability. That has not, to my knowledge, been proven.
That's right.
The gentleman is old enough, isn't it true, to read the history books that talked about World War II.
Absolutely. My father fought in World War II. I remember his stories well.
And, well, isn't it true? When the bombers couldn't make it back home, got shot down, it was those Tuskegee Airmen that led them to all those victory flights.
They did a brilliant job, and we're proud of the Tuskegee Airmen. Every Tuskegee Airman earned that privilege based on their ability, not on their color. Remember, you have to provide them the opportunity.
No. Senator, isn't it true? The same guy that talked about DEI was fined for not letting folks stay in an apartment, and he called them DEI. Isn't that true?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm not familiar with that allegation. I would suggest to you that this bill is addressing the banning of DEI in the educational environment in Georgia, both at the secondary and the post-secondary level. Happy to yield for other questions.
I appreciate what Senator Lucas was trying to do, the Tuskegee Airmen reference. They are, of course, deserving of that praise. Of course, they were also caught in the crossfire of the Pentagon's swift anti-DEI push by having them even removed from websites. Recognition, that's how fast this anti-DEI push has been. It's being done without much regard for authenticity. It's just a matter of, I see a group of black men and only black men, whack it in the photo. Take it out. Can't have, do you know it? Gay? Oh no, got to take that. See, that's the stupidity of this push, this rush to erase any hint of diversity in our military, our school systems, at all whatsoever. In fact, I would argue the Tuskegee Airmen excelled despite the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts back during World War II. How much more easily could we have assisted in winning World War II if we'd had diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts prior to World War II? We'll never know. But we do know that the Tuskegee Airmen had to overcome obstacles just to get the ability to fly a plane, to be the Tuskegee Airmen that they are. Oh, and for historical purposes, it was correct, David Lucas pointing out that Donald Trump and his father smote by the Richard Nixon administration for unfair housing practices. Back after this, The Ron Show, America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Call or text the show if you'd like, 404-919-2725 if you have comments or thoughts. Ron at ronshowatl.com is my email address, at ronshowatl on your preferred social media platforms. Twitter, X, Substack, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky. Yeah, we're there. The Democrats tried everything they could to derail this anti-DEI amended House Bill 127, which again was intended just to provide some extra personal days for school teachers, and then got hijacked by anti-DEI Republicans dog whistling to the racist portion of their base. They offered a slate of amendments, all of which got shot down, and then continued to discuss and dialogue and debate several tactics to try and use parliamentary procedure to derail this. Did not come to fruition. I want you to listen, however, to Senator Derek Mello from the 2nd District, who spoke up after David Lucas had his opportunity as well.
This is one of those bills, colleagues, that had John Q. Public and Jane Q. Public had the opportunity to come and debate and have a robust debate about DEI. I don't want to say DEI, I want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's right, the words.
And I thought about, in discussing diversity and discussing equity and discussing inclusion, if there is a need to ban DEI, then what is the opposite to diversity? Well, the opposite to diversity is uniformity.
Yep.
And to be uniform means that you lack any other options for anyone to be different, to look different, to talk different, to walk different, to be different.
Individuality, right.
Then I thought about, well, what is the opposite of equity? Well, the opposite of equity is inequity.
That's right.
And then I thought about, what is the opposite of inclusion?
Exclusion.
Well, the opposite of inclusion is exclusion.
Has he been listening to my show?
Now, my colleagues may not quite understand where I'm coming from because you don't know what it's like to be first if you've never been last.
That's right.
And so when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But when the architects wrote that promise, there were some folks that could not benefit from that promise.
This is true.
And that's why we have diversity of thought, diversity of personhood, because we did treat some folks like second-class citizens.
Or worse, chattel.
And when I look at this bill and we talk about educational programs and the post-secondary institution shall promote, support, or maintain any programs or activities that advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it lists a group of definitions. So then I had to do the math because I am a public school graduate, and when I look back on the math, it had only been 61 years since the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been passed. It wasn't until 1971 that the city of Savannah would integrate public schools and have a federal monitor for 20 years because the school district chose to remain segregated for another 20 years. It wasn't until 1996 when the city of Savannah would elect its first African-American mayor because representation had not always been granted. But then I thought about maybe if I just skip back from 1964 and I'm leaving 2025, maybe I would get down to 1865. And in 1865, General William Tecumseh Sherman would march, burning every plantation on his way from Atlanta down to Savannah, but he would issue Sherman's Field Order number 15 that said, basically on all 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land, it would be divided by 40 acres for every African American to get 40 acres and a mule. That was equity. Well, we know that President Lincoln was assassinated, and that promise was not delivered. So that equity promise never came to for those folks that had been oppressed. And so while we're talking about what is diversity, what is equity, and what is inclusion, colleagues, it is more than just what you see on this sheet of paper right here. It is a fundamental understanding of the folks that have fought, bled, and died, especially in the civil rights movement, to make sure that African Americans could have an equal footing or a place. And so when I read words in the bill that talk about you cannot promulgate policies or promote policies or procedures implemented with reference to race, color, sex, ethnicity, national origin, gender, identity, or sexual orientation, colleagues, I wonder what made us so nervous about having folks that were diverse.
Well, conservatives don't do well with diverse populations of people, and the demography of the state is changing, and sometimes too fast for them to adjust ideologically, so they have to do things like this and gerrymander. You're listening to The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So where we left off, there was contentious debate about House Bill 127, which, again, was just an innocuous little bill to give a handful of more personal days, to Georgia's public school teachers. The Georgia GOP, however, saw an opportunity to revive a dead bill, a bill that they could not get out of either chamber, to eviscerate any hint of DEI, even discussed at the public or secondary school level, attached it to that bill to jam it through at the last minute. And listen, this is one of many, dozens of bad bills that this legislature is passing this session. The Georgia GOP has put the foot on the gas in their MAGA tirade to pass a lot of bad legislation. And perhaps Governor Brian Kemp won't sign them all. I don't have high hopes. He has political ambitions beyond being governor of Georgia for his 2 terms that he is allowed to serve. Maybe it's a Senate run. Maybe it's a presidential run in 2028. I don't know. He hasn't said. But I do know that he has ambitions, and in most cases, he has fought the good fight, survived the Trump tantrum, and now knows he needs as many votes as possible in a state that, as we mentioned before, the demography is working hard against the ingrained conservative white male patriarchy in this state. So they have to gerrymander. They have to confuse. They have to obfuscate. They have to otherize, marginalize. It's trans people now, that small sliver of our population. But what you're hearing in the Georgia Senate last night is Democrats putting up a fight and making valid points. And in Derek Malau's case, David Lucas' case, even shaming Republicans for either being unaware of history or looking to suppress it altogether. By the way, today is let me do the math, the 57th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Don't know if you knew that. And by the way, I have a guest lined up for, I think it's next Monday, maybe Tuesday, to talk a little bit about that and what has transpired since then in memorializing and eulogizing that fateful, horrible day 57 years ago. Senator Mallow actually brought that up last night where we left off.
It would be illegal to talk about history. It would be illegal to accept the reality of the painful past of folks that may not look like everybody in this room. And so when we talk about anti-racism, a systemic oppression, a social justice, I would remind my colleagues the night before his assassination in April of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King told a group of striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, that we have to give ourselves to this struggle until the end. Nothing would be more tragic than to stop at this point in Memphis. We've got to see it through, because Dr. King believed the struggle in Memphis exposed the need for economic equality and social justice. That's why he wanted to highlight his poor people's campaign nationally, because the fight for economic equality and social justice are not just simply diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, my colleagues, I just ask you this question. Have you given yourselves to the struggle to eradicate different identities and people of different thoughts and ideas? Because, again, you don't know what it's like to be first until you've ever been last. Right. In the history of the United States of America, we have only appointed 3 African Americans to the highest court in the United States. Why is that? And so, as I continue to move through this bill, just to highlight the further issues with the bill, it just continues to talk about having any program, and you would violate this subsection and we would withhold state funding or state administered federal funding. Well, we see what happened when DEI rolled out at the federal level. The Tuskegee Airmen were removed from the Department of Defense website. Yep. We saw that the first major general from Vietnam, an African American to receive the Medal of Honor, was removed from the website. Right. We see that Jackie Robinson was removed from the website. Right. We see this over and over and over again, because the opposite of diversity is uniformity. Bingo. And when the architects of our republic wrote those magnificent words to the Declaration of Independence, folks who looked like me didn't have the opportunity to partake in that promise. So Dr. King said, we're all tied together in an inescapable network of mutuality, that whatever I am, you ought to be, and until I can be what I ought to be, you can't be what you ought to be. And so the idea that we would ban diversity, equity, and inclusion is simply nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Because if you truly look at the merits of this bill, what other opportunities do we withhold funding? We never withheld funding from any post-secondary institution if they denied someone entrance based on their race, their ethnicity, their color, creed. We've never withheld that funding. We've never passed any laws or legislation like that. And so now we say, but if you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're going to hold the money back. Well, what about the folks that paved the way? We're going to say that, oh, well, now we can't talk about race. It makes me uncomfortable. Well, that is a dark past of history that we too must accept. You cannot sweep history under the rug. You have to accept the things as though they have happened. But the idea that you would limit the discussion based on this because it makes you uncomfortable, colleagues, I think we're better than this bill. Just because somebody says something don't make it true. Just because somebody said something, I've never understood how DEI can be classified as didn't earn it. And when you talk about things will be based on merit, that is an ideology that the person who makes the determination of what is merit, they get to determine what is merit worthy. What is the merit? You can still have all the requirements and all the things checked, like many African Americans. They checked the box and they were still denied entrance. They had all the criteria and all the qualifications and they were still denied a license. They had every opportunity to do everything and they were still denied. So it can't be about merit, because we already tried that before and merit didn't work for us. We tried merit time and time again and we were still at the bottom of the barrel. So clearly we had to have something to make some equity in this program. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion is just simply that, colleagues. It's an opportunity to bring people in that don't look like you. And if you don't look to see who the folks are that don't look like you and to see where their makeup happens to be, I wouldn't be the senator of the 2nd if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Act. Because my district under Section 2 is majority minority, majority black. The folks that send me to Atlanta happen to be majority black. And they chose to elect a representative. That's why you can't crack and that's why you can't pack. Because if this was truly all equitable, we wouldn't have those laws on the books and folks wouldn't be trying to pack folks in a district or trying to crack folks in another district.
Gerrymandering.
But as I close, Mr. President, time and time again, what a tangled web we weave when we seek to deceive. But colleagues, I just want you to know, if you vote on this bill, it'll be a referendum on how you view folks that don't look like you, how you don't view folks that may not think like you think, look like how you look. And colleagues, I think that's a slippery sliding slope. Anytime we pass laws like this, because the unintended consequence is just like when we were fighting to make sure that AP African American history would be treated the same way as European AP history.
Yeah.
The state school superintendent couldn't even answer the question as to why it wasn't permitted. Had to have folks make phone calls, had to have folks write letters, do all of those things to include AP African American history. Even Governor Kemp himself sent a letter over to the state school superintendent to ask why AP African American history wasn't being treated the same as European history. Why the Attorney General sent a letter, had to ask the same question. So if it was all about diversity, equity, and inclusion, why last year did we have to go through all of that hurdle to ensure that AP African American history would be treated and taught the same as European history? My colleagues, where were you on that? Did you sit silently in your chairs and be duplicitous in the process, or did you say something about it?
They were silent.
Because I remember I checked the roll call of people that sent a letter over to the state school superintendent asking a question about why the treatment was different. And so, again, I just say, if it was about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we wouldn't be fighting right now to make sure that representation was equal for everybody. Right. But you don't know what it's like to be first until you've ever been last. And if you've never been last, Mr. President, I don't know what to tell you, but I can tell you about some folks that have been last. I can tell you about some folks that have been first. I can tell you about some folks that did some amazing things. And as I take my seat for the last time, Mr. President, I'm reminded of that great sister named Fannie Lou Hamer that said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And Mr. President, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I yield the well.
Passionate. Senator Josh McLaurin up next.
Senator, do you remember earlier this year when there was a tragic collision of a plane and a helicopter at a D.C. airport? You remember that episode?
I absolutely remember that. The senator from the 14th, I do.
Senator, further yield?
I further yield.
Senator, you remember that several officials in President Trump's administration, I think including the president himself, blamed the crash on DEI. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, Senator.
And Senator, do you yield for a couple more questions about that?
I do. I yield for a series from my good friend from the 14th.
Senator, at the time, was there any evidence of who even the pilots of the helicopter and the plane were when the president made these comments?
There was no evidence based on who the pilot or the co-pilot of either of the aircrafts at the time happened to be, but to make a statement about DEI from the former president was no indication that he actually had any factual basis to make that determination, but it was something that he just decided to spew.
Senator, not that we know the mind of the president directly, but is there any indication of why the president or some of his officials might have immediately blamed DEI or blamed the crash on quote-unquote DEI?
It was to further stoke, in my opinion, Senator, further division in this country, to have folks wondering, well, who were the pilots and what if they were of the D version of DEI and were diverse? And so when those pilots were not diverse, he never retracted the statement to say, oh, it's not DEI, because he didn't know who the pilots were.
Right. Senator, and I want to be very clear, colleagues, that I don't think that everybody who says DEI in a derogatory way means this. But what is the concern that some people have about why people are using the word DEI and what they mean when they say that?
Well, Senator from the 14th, you know also well that when folks use the term now DEI, it is the new N-word to be derogatory, especially of those of African American, African descent here in this country. And it is furthermore derogatory to say DEI and to classify that by saying didn't earn it. As you know, Senator from the 14th, I hold 3 degrees, and I believe that I'm very much educated. But I got to school on a thank you, Jesus, not cum laude, not magna cum laude, not summa cum laude, but thank you, Lord.
Again, this is not me focusing on this one particular bill, just to point out all the wrongness of the bill. There's been a lot of wrong and awful bills that made it out of the Georgia General Assembly through last night, and tonight will be a pretty late night as well, I'm sure. It's just to point out, for those who hand-wring, oh, Democrats are weak. Listen, I have my issues with the Democratic Party as well, even Georgia Democrats. People I've had on this show, I've had issues and not been shy about vocalizing them, even to them. But you have to also understand sometimes the way the game is set. The game is set not to be fair, not to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Commensurate, not to be laid out in a way that in a state like Georgia that is a 51-49 state, 52-48. The General Assembly isn't set up that way. And if it were, a lot of these terrible bills wouldn't make it out of the Senate because they don't get 2/3 majority, So Georgia Senate Democrats last night did a lot of standing up, did a lot of fighting, procedures, amendments, this, that, and the other, to try and stop this one particular bill. Earlier this week, they did a mass walkout in the House to try and stop anti-DEI legislation. At the end of the day, the math ain't mathin'. And Democrats sometimes have to understand that and just move on. So even though a lot of bad legislation made it through since last night, will again today, the next step is working on the governor because he's got to sign them all and decide what to or not to sign. And again, in a state where it's a razor-thin margin, where he assuredly would either like to be the GOP Senate nominee and then win the states, win one of the state's Senate seats, or perhaps run for president, knowing that Georgia is a swing state. This is where the ball is in our court, us. Okay, a lot of bad legislation is going to make it through, and we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and get to work and push the governor to push a lot of these bad bills aside. We'll talk a little bit about that, what we need to do. And you know what? A lot of it starts tomorrow. There are rallies going on throughout the country. Atlanta will be one of those locations for us to stand up and make our voices heard. It's The Ron Show, America One Radio, progressive voices via TuneIn. Final few minutes of the Friday Ron Show. And for the week, there is a weekend edition of the show that airs Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m., 11 a.m. at Progressive Voices via TuneIn. If you missed any of this week's show, we'll give you some of the better portions of it. I talked a good bit about the fact that there is an opportunity for us to step forward now. There are a lot of bad bills passing. By the way, the religious, the RFRA discrimination bill, that has also passed. And again, we're at the whim of the governor. Charlotte Craman from the Associated Press reporting on this Wednesday. Lawmakers in Georgia passed a controversial bill Wednesday that aims to protect people's rights to express their religion. Like they've had obstacles to that up to this point, right? But that critics say could lead to discrimination. Modeled after the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the bill would prevent governments from impeding on someone's religious rights in most cases and stop the enforcement of laws that conflict with someone's religious expression. The Republican-led state House approved the bill 96-70, but Democrats, including those who spoke about their Christian faith, said that without added protections, the bill will let people discriminate against LGBTQ plus people and religious minorities. 2 Republicans voted against it, while 1 Democrat supported it. The bill passed Wednesday is similar to a highly contested one that former Governor Nathan Deal vetoed in 2016. Amid widespread protests and concerns from Georgia's business community that it would hurt their ability to attract employees and tourists. The Metro Atlanta Chamber opposed this year's bill. See, I'm telling you, there's a chance. You're saying there's a chance. I'm saying there's a chance that we, the people, can weigh on the conscience of this governor to veto, not sign, a lot of bad legislation that made it out. And the first opportunity to do that, by the way, it's happening on Saturday, tomorrow. There is a mass rally organized by a bunch of organizations, actually, to take to the streets. I'm going to read to you from the mobilize.us link. I'll put it in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Saturday, April 5th, we're taking to the streets to fight back with a clear message. Hands off. And this is mostly about DOGE and federal evisceration of entitlements. But this is an opportunity to send a message even to the Brian Kemps and the Georgia GOPs of the world. You don't have the numbers you think you do. And perhaps there is power in our voices to overcome, yes, even gerrymandering. It's going to take place. They're going to gather at Piedmont Park at 12:30 and start marching at 1 o'clock to the Capitol. And the rally there begins around 2:30. They write, the mass mobilization day is our message to the world that we do not consent to the destruction of our government and our economy for the benefit of Trump and his billionaire allies. Alongside Americans across the country, we are marching, rallying, and protesting to demand a stop to the chaos and build an opposition movement against the looting of our country. A core principle behind all hands-off events is a commitment to nonviolent action. We expect all participants to seek to de-escalate any potential confrontation with those who disagree with our values. So, you have organizations like Indivisible, the NAACP, 50501, the Working Families Power, ACLU, Common Defense, Regulate Guns Not Women, Color of Change, the Human Rights Campaign, the Galileo Impact Fund, Black Lives Matter, American Friends Service Community, Reproductive Freedom for All, American Federation of Government Employees, Georgia AFL-CIO. And they'll all be gathering again, Piedmont Park in Atlanta, and throughout the country, actually. Tomorrow in Atlanta, Piedmont Park at 12:30. Marching begins at 1. Rally at the Capitol at 2:30. I have said to several legislators, state legislators who have been on this show in the last few weeks, I admire them. Honestly, I do. Knowing that they're going to work these 40 days, that the deck is stacked against them, that the game is rigged against their party, and thus, if not a majority of Georgians, a minority that is just slightly below the number of the majority. And that they go in there and they make their effort every day to fight the good fight, to attach amendments to poison a bill, to use parliamentary procedure, debate, to work with, and how many times have we said this throughout this legislative session? There have been Republicans voting against legislation because they actually can be reasoned with. I mean, the number's been 1 or 2. It's not a good it's not a good picture for the GOP when it comes to being reasonable. Reasonableness, if that's a word. But they, in fact, I can name something. I can think Deborah Silcox off the top of my head. She is in a swing district. There are very few swing districts, again, thanks to gerrymandering. So the opportunity for us to, as citizens, as voters, to have some sway is largely muted by gerrymandering. Here in the state of Georgia, at the county level even, we saw where they turned back Cobb County's very much blue majority at the state legislative level. Very little opportunity for us to show our disdain and vote people out that we don't agree with because of gerrymandering. And that works for Democrats in states like Maryland too. It's a bad concept that needs to have been done away with. And while Wisconsinites, Republican Wisconsinites and Elon Musk are complaining about Wisconsin about to be gerrymandered blue, hey, your Supreme Court had the opportunity to get rid of gerrymandering a couple of years ago, and they whiffed on it. So what are you going to do, right? That's where we are. That's where we are here in Georgia. Like, I don't think Democrats have a 55-45 majority, but they sure voted that way in Wisconsin just a few days ago. But Democrats having the power in Wisconsin, I can't blame them if they decide to do exactly what the GOP here in Georgia is doing and has done for a long time. So sit back, relax, and take your medicine, Republican Wisconsinites. Or we could agree that gerrymandering is really bad for us. Brian Kemp's going to run for office, some office, whether it's a Senate seat, statewide race, or whether he's going to run for president in 2028. And we have to weigh on him now. Tomorrow isn't about him. Tomorrow's rally is not about him, but it can be. And it could be one of many rallies that are about him and should be about him. And don't think that organizations like, Georgia Equality, who we've had on this show, aren't going to be working to stay in his face, to stay on his radar about some of the awful legislation that has made its way through the General Assembly. Our legislators have busted their ass to try and derail a lot of this, and the numbers have worked against them. So there's only so much they could do. And we can't just sit back and say, oh, they're weak, they're bad. No, it's our turn. We haven't given them enough power. Now we have to take some of our own. That is going to do it for today's Ron Show. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow. I'd like to hope that we'll bump into each other. Show notes, as always, at ronshowatl.com. The show airs 9 a.m., 5 p.m. weekdays on America One Radio, 11 to midnight at Progressive Voices via TuneIn and wherever you podcast. Have a great weekend. We'll see you out and about, if not Monday.